Starting a business can be overwhelming, and a great way to make it simple is to go step by step. The Online Business Academy offers simple, easy to follow, and completely free courses to help you find a business idea, create a business plan, build a website, and more. The short videos, bonus activities, and resources give you everything you need to take your business up and running. Hosted by industry experts such as Ryan Foland, Jason Falls, and Kim Gast, these courses also come with interesting activities and exciting prizes. For more information, visit academy.get.online. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Buller Show. Today I have with me Lance Mortlock. Now, Lance is the author of Disaster Proof, which is a book about how to do scenario planning for a post-pandemic future and how much are we looking forward to that future, hopefully. Also, he talks about in the book about AI, the new frontier as well, and we're going to go a little bit into that area as well. Lance is a strategy partner with Ernst Young in Canada, based in Calgary. He's been in consulting services for over 20 years, and he's worked with C-suite of leading national and international mining, gas companies and others. He's a strategist. He's a visiting professor at the University of Calgary Business School and a board member of the Canadian Energy and Climate Nexus. So welcome to the show, Lance. It's great to have you here from the other side of the world.
Yeah, good to be here. Good to be here.
Now, that's people might have noticed that's not a Canadian accent. That's Lance is originally from the beautiful island of England, I believe.
I am indeed. Yeah. The Canadian. Yeah, the Canadian accent hasn't rubbed off on me, but my daughters, they're certainly Canadian, and I've been here a long time now.
It's the challenges with Australians when we hear Canadian accents is that sometimes we think they're American, and that's very offensive, I think. Is it generally correct?
Yeah, it's a bit like calling an Australian a Kiwi, isn't it?
That's exactly right. Yeah, so I do love the technology we got here. We can actually have a chat, from anywhere in the world on video, high definition, and get to pick the brains of some of the smartest people on the planet. And looking forward to chat with Lance today. So, Lance, what got you into scenario planning? Because I think that's the real focus of what you do at Ernst Young and in your business life.
Yeah, so I mean, as you mentioned in your warm, welcoming comments there, I've spent my career working in the strategy space, and for me it started pretty early on when I was working with Shell in Europe, and I was part of a team that was looking at some of Shell's planning processes, and it gave me kind of that early exposure, Jeff, to one of the eminent leaders, I would say, in terms of scenario planning. Like, Shell took original military planning to the next level in terms of the use of scenarios in the private sector. Guys like Pierre Wack and others really advanced the thinking to the next level, and I had exposure to some of those planning professionals at Shell, and it really stuck with me in my career, and I took it forward over a couple of decades, through working in different organizations, different clients in different countries.
So could you explain to our listeners what scenario planning is?
Yeah, so in its simple terms, it's all about thinking about the future and multiple futures. So it's not thinking about one future and trying to predict that future. That's forecasting. What scenario planning is it's saying, look, the world can play out in different ways. We could see a situation where, situation A plays out, I don't know, energy transition is accelerated and we're all getting our power from renewables. Or scenario C or B, which is actually oil and gas is going to prevail over the long term, and we're going to continue to use the internal combustion engine, and electric vehicles will be, marginalized, or something in between. So it's about painting those different futures to say A, B, and C could play out. what would we do in each of those situations? And so it's a more thoughtful approach to thinking about the future. Because if there's anything that I've learned, we all do a terrible job of predicting what might happen, given COVID, right? None of us saw it coming. And here we are a year and a half later still dealing with it.
Yeah, because a lot of pundits were saying, even would be out of this by June, July 2020. And here we are in June 2021, and it's still playing out. So, are you doing any strategy planning for organisations in terms of a post-pandemic world, scenario planning for them?
I am, yeah. And I think, Jeff, now's a good time for a lot of organizations and governments, so like private sector organizations and governments, to say, okay, what next? I think we're at a stage now, certainly in the more developed world, where we're starting to emerge. I mean, I look at, you know, my colleagues south of the border here in Canada, the US, and we're seeing, sports games with 50,000 people. Like, things are returning to normal. And it sounds like in Australia, for example, and New Zealand, like largely life is getting back to normal and people are getting vaccinated, certainly here in Canada as well. And so what more, I think that now's a perfect time to say, okay, that was a really terrible year and a half that we've all dealt with. Like, where to from here? What does the future look like? And I think we can expect as professionals that there's going to be more uncertainty as we go forward. We don't know what the next major global catastrophe is going to be, but like, history is a great predictor of the future. There's going to be something in that we least expect. And success is companies preparing for that in a thoughtful way.
Yeah. There's some interesting things unfolding in front of us that have been driven by you know, the pandemic unfolding, the black swan event. For example, supply chains have been disrupted enormously. So we've seen it happen, like play out with chips for cars, computer chips that drive cars now, essentially. We're also seeing it with, I'm a cyclist, for example, and it's very hard to buy a new bike because the supply chain has been disrupted and there's hardly any bikes in stores, and everyone's gone and bought bikes as well. So there's a whole range of scenarios playing out in front of us. The stock market plummeted, then went back up and has now gone past its previous highs. Who would have predicted that? So it must be both daunting and also fun trying to predict those futures or do scenario planning.
It is. And I think, when I go back in history, if you look at 9/11, when 9/11 happened, which was obviously a terrible event, a bit like COVID, um, there was an uptake in the use of scenarios during that period of time immediately afterwards. And we're seeing that now. Certainly during COVID, a lot of companies saying, hey, actually, this is a pretty interesting, helpful management tool. And I think we'll continue to see more companies use it. And I think the other thing that I would say, Jeff, is it's interesting that you mentioned bikes, because from a supply chain perspective, one of the curious things about that is cardboard. And so you'd say, well, what does cardboard have to do with bikes? Well, when you order a bike or you're a shop and you order a bike, you need cardboard to ship it. The problem is with COVID, Amazon is using all the cardboard and has bought all the cardboard in the world. So there's actually, in some cases here in Canada, there's enough bikes, we just can't ship them. So you kind of scratch your head and you look at those things, and there's like some weird things going on from a supply chain perspective.
Oh, it is. It's really, really weird. And it's the sort of scenarios, well, for example, if you go and plan a trip or trying to plan a trip, even if it's just local within your country, and you try and rent a car. A lot of the car rental companies sold off their fleets because they weren't being used, and so they needed to get working capital. So now when you go to rent a car, it's 4 times the price. So there's these just interesting things that no one thought of, that just go, My God, I never thought of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the other interesting thing is like just how some companies have pivoted during the pandemic. You know, you think about like certainly in my country here in Canada, we've seen like oil and gas companies pivot to create hand sanitizer, and we've seen, you know, the great Dyson company, highly innovative company, pivot to create ventilators, you know,
Mm.
because it's a core competence for them, and in terms of some of the transferable engineering. So all kinds of interesting stuff and has happened in the last 12 months that, or year and a half, that we haven't expected.
So the other thing that I've certainly been watching with interest is the rise of remote work and hybrid work, um, and all the tools that have been not and quickly developed as well. But some have had tools that have already helped what we call remote work collaboration. Um, there's companies that have benefited and continue to benefit, such as Atlassian, which is an Australian-based company, which has had um, collaboration tools. Uh, the impact, and that's interesting. I'd be interested in your thoughts on where do you see the different scenarios for remote work and hybrid work, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think lots of companies are real time playing that out. That, you know, there's different options here or different scenarios. There's a world where the pandemic is pervasive and continues, and the new variants kind of impact us in ways that, you know, we least expect, and um, you know, maybe the remote working situation needs to continue for longer than we expected. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is, you know, we all get vaccinated, the less developed world gets vaccinated, and we return to normal pretty quickly, and we expect people to come back into the office pretty quickly. And then there's kind of an in between, which is, you know, society has fundamentally changed. A lot of people and companies have realized, you know, productivity hasn't been impacted as much as we thought, and
Mm.
people appreciate the flexibility, and remote working will continue for a period of time. I was listening to a call um, a couple of weeks ago between the CEO of Microsoft and the CEO of EY globally, and you know, those guys, both very, very smart guys, saying, you know, the right, probably the right answer is somewhere in between, where
Mm.
there's a balance between more remote working, but we do need some interaction, because as humans, we need that engagement is important. Mental health is important, and probably in between is the right place that we'll land at in the end. That's what I think. That's where my head's at, Jeff.
Yeah, I certainly think that's my observation. I think we're going to end up with a hybrid model. I think people have enjoyed the flexibility of, and it's also helped family life. Like, it's very hard for work both home all the time because you've got children, young children, quite often to deal with. Um, on the other hand, yes, we do need humans need social interaction, and also collaboration isn't quite the same on a Zoom call as opposed to in person or around the water cooler where ideas can pop up. So yeah, it's really, really important. I think that, and well, I think we've been pushed into the future, um, maybe by 10 years, because companies were afraid of letting their staff work unsupervised, because the old adage quite often in corporations was management by walking around. So, but interesting your comment about that the productivity really hasn't dropped much at all, if at all. In fact, sometimes it's even improved.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I would qualify that comment by saying it depends where and
Yeah.
what type of company. You know, I would talk to some companies that would say where there's a high degree of engagement and interaction required, it's dropped. But in other companies where, you know, their business might be primarily a call center, transactional back office in nature, or a highly dispersed workforce already, it doesn't. it hasn't really changed. So it kind of depends.
Mm. Yeah, well, the other reality is that numbers I've heard in talking to some CEOs and entrepreneurs that run, they actually have software companies that do remote work management, for example. Um, they the numbers they've sort of thrown around is around the low 40% is about the number of people that can work remotely, because not everyone can work remotely.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
And for example, people that drive trucks, they can't. People that work in hospitality, they can't. People that work, work with airlines, they can't as well. And the list goes on and on. Um, so the other part of your book that I found interesting, was especially towards the end of it, was AI, the new frontier. And AI has been knocking on the door for a long time and is now weaving itself into a whole range of industries. Um, so scenario planning for an AI-driven future, and AI is not going to run everything. Humans are still, innately creative, and but AI. So the new frontier. How do you see that playing out in different industries? What are some of the, I suppose, interesting stories you've heard and case studies?
Yeah, so there's two parts to the question. There is, the scenario itself, which is a society that is um, much more influence, and AI is much more pervasive. So that's kind of one part of it. We can certainly talk about um, that aspect. But then there's also the use of AI in management processes and in strategic processes, which I talk about in the book, which is, traditionally AI, and it's a rapidly advancing technology, has been used in, a lot of operational processes. But what we're starting to see is its use in more strategic processes. And the fundamental challenge that organizations have, which I talk about in quite some detail in Disaster Proof in the book, is we've got more and more data than ever before. IBM would say we've created more data in the last 2 years than the rest of humanity and history combined.
Mm.
And the question is, or the challenge is, how do we deal with this data? What does it mean? What are the insights? How does it inform our decisions? How do we make sense of it? And that's the challenge. And as humans, we've reached our capacity in many cases and in many situations. And what I talk about is that we can use, in some cases, existing technology, particularly around natural language processing, which is a form of AI or a particular sector or subsection of AI, to help us process information and data. And I think if you think about and you take a step back and say, well, what scenarios? Scenarios is really helping us make sense of the world. What's happening in the world? What uncertainties are at play? What risks are at play? And if you can use AI to help uncover those risks, make sense of those uncertainties using, mathematical algorithms, you have potentially a very powerful tool to make sense of the world in a very rapid way. One of the examples that I talk about in the book is that the Canadian government, for a period of time, was using NLP to make sense of 10,000 data sources as it relates to emerging viruses. And so they were able to use this technology to successfully identify MERS, H1N1, SARS, these kind of viruses as an early warning signal. The US are using natural language processing and machine learning technology for hurricane detection, an early warning system again. The military is using it in military planning. Investment bankers are using it for highly complicated, rapid transactions. The new frontier for me is that, as it relates to thinking about the future, which I talk about in Disaster Proof, we are going to continue to see NLP, AI, machine learning, RPA, these tools and these technologies being used in, very advanced way to inform our strategic like never before. And so to me, that's one part of your question, which is AI enabling strategists and CEOs in new and quite interesting ways in the future. And then there's the other part of your, I think what you're getting at, which is, well, what does an AI future actually mean as a scenario in itself, which is a different question, so to speak.
Yeah, so yeah, AI is certainly the industry I work in, which is marketing, business growth, entrepreneurship, uh, resources, and I suppose planning and education. Um, AI is affecting things like approvals for advertising, for example, from Google or Facebook. It's not humans can't at scale do approval for running an ad on Facebook or running an ad on Google. But what we're rubbing up against a lot too, for example, in that area, is that they're knocking back ads because of they've detected a word in amongst a lot of data that's going, well, you're talking about the politics, and I think one was sensitive events is their general catch-all phrase about, well, you've mentioned COVID, so we're actually not going to run your ad, or you've been talking about politics in New Zealand, so we're not going to run your ad. The other thing that's been very interesting is your ad's not doesn't have enough diversity, so we're not going to run your ad. So at the moment, I think we're on the edge of a great technology, but at the moment, it's sometimes quite dumb.
Yeah, no, I mean the technologies are only as good as the algorithms that you can
That's
program,
right.
and diversity is an interesting one because, as you would know, there's a lot of ethics involved in AI and machine learning around bias, and the
Yep.
bias of the programmers that actually make the algorithms. So
Yep.
yeah, there's still work to be done for sure, but like make no mistake, it is a rapidly evolving and advancing area that will continue to pervade through every aspect of our lives in the future.
Yeah. Well, and AI is being used to create content like robotic news reporting, for example, is happening now. Um, so yes, it's definitely here. It's going to evolve. Sometimes it's quite imperfect because it's at the start of this revolution and evolution. Um, the other things that you look at, which you mentioned in your book too, was what are the macro factors that are changing the world. And you go into, I think there's 8 macro factors, which I found quite fascinating. And it's good to step back and going, okay, so what are the macro factors affecting the world? One, geopolitics, technologies changing the world. For example, that's happening uh, in the power and energy industry. Um, so then you've got climate change, and then you've got new human behaviour driven by the use of social media, for example, and smartphones. Uh, so there's a whole lot of things that, and so you must be when you're sitting down with a client, trying to just look at. There's so many factors affecting scenario planning. So maybe if you could quickly give us a thumbnail sketch of some simple steps for scenario planning. So that could be applied to a small to medium business, because a big enterprise is sure they've got tens of billions of dollars at stake. So what would be a simple approach, if you can share that with us, to scenario planning for a small to medium business? What would be the process that you'd recommend for them?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll definitely address that part of your question. But before I do that, a couple of things I wanted to say. So you're right. There are lots of uncertainties and factors impacting the world. I talk about the 8 big ones. I was talking to a gold mining company actually earlier today about this, and to them, we said, yeah, there's 8 big macro trends or factors that I talk about in the book, but there's some very specific ones to mining. And I think that that's what you've got to do is you've got to, yeah, look at the big ones, and that's good context, but actually make it real for your company and say what's specifically important for our
Yeah,
company, and kind of bring it down a level. And it's almost like a prioritization, because you
yeah,
can't look at everything. You don't have the resources to kind of look at everything. So that prioritization piece, Jeff, is
Yep.
really, really important. In terms of the steps themselves, um, like I would say the first step is define the scope. What are you trying to achieve here? What question are you trying to address? What problem are you trying to solve? And what people do you want to involve in that? I would always say, like, and where I've seen this successful is where you involve a cross section of people that bring different perspectives, maybe even people from outside of your company. I was working with a big cementing company where we actually invited their customers to come in and join the dialogue. Very, very powerful to get the customer's perspective.
Absolutely.
Step one is define the scope. Step two is do the research. And that's doing primary, secondary research. It can be a multi-month process or a 2-day process, depending on how much resource you want to throw at this.
Mm-hmm.
Step three is analyze the trends and understand, what does the research tell us? What does it mean? What are the risks? What are the uncertainties? And then once you've done that, step four is build the scenarios and really the signposts, the signals that you want to watch for. Then say, okay, now we've got these scenarios mapped out. Let's stress test our strategy against that. That's step five. And then step six is monitor what's going on in the world so that when a scenario plays out, which is, renewables is going to rapidly accelerate, for example, or airline travel is going to return to normal very, very quickly, you're ready for that, and your strategy is ready to pivot. And so it's a very simple 6-step process, which I talk about in one of the chapters in the book. And I try, Jeff, to write the book in a way that anyone can pick it up. You might be a non-for-profit or a global corporation, and there's something in there's something in it for everyone in terms of the way that I write the book. It's written in a way that it's meant to be very accessible and can be scaled up and down depending on whether you're a big or a small company.
Yeah. I actually wrote down the 6 steps of the scenario planning. It was define the scope, explore the internal, external environment, analyze trends, risks, and uncertainties, build scenarios and signposts, and then confirm the scenarios and stress test, as you said, and monitor the signposts and execute the strategies. I certainly, for me, in the past, have watched what's unfolding in an industry. Like, I joined the computer industry after doing a teaching degree, and I was very lucky. I leapt into the middle of the whole PC revolution. So, of course, that was starting to make the mini computers and mainframe computers not a big opportunity. In fact, the PC industry, as we know, is basically taken over. It doesn't mean there's no mainframes. It just means that the number of PCs in the world went from 6, I think IBM predicted, to tens of millions. But then we've had other things along the way that, the internet showed up, social media showed up. There's a whole range of things that I suppose start to unfold, and then you're going, okay, this is definitely a trend rather than just because it has been a trend and something that's just topical. So trends are certainly the ones to watch. And the other thing I'd be interested in your thoughts, which is a little bit off topic of disaster planning, but I strike a lot of professionals that work in the work in the knowledge industries. And you know what? A lot of them don't give themselves the permission and time to do enough reading. What they do is they get so busy in their work, they forget to see the big trends are unfolding in their industry in front of them that they're quite often advising clients on. And I think that a lot of us as professionals don't give ourselves enough permission to read and research. What do you think? Do you think that's the case?
Oh, I would agree. 100%, Jeff. Like, I mean, I certainly in my own life and my own profession, I prioritize reading. Like, as a strategist, I have to. So, like, I mean, I every day I wake up very early and I read for an hour. 7 days a week, because I think in a complex world, it's important to be informed. And I think another part of your question is interesting, and I think it relates to disaster proof is mental models. And I talk about this American psychologist Joy Guilford, and she talks about like convergent and divergent thinking. And I think too often in life we diverge on the solution. We converge on the solution, decide what to do far too quickly without what I call wallowing in the ambiguity, exploring the possibility, reading, researching, what does it mean? How's this playing out? And saying, no, we're not going to, as a management team or as a leadership team or as a working team, decide what to do straight away. Let's just talk about it. Let's debate it. Let's research it. Let's raise some questions. So I think that there's that aspect of exploring the world, and part of exploring is reading and researching. Very, very important.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I think having a curious mind, I think, is really important. And you talked about divergent and convergent thinking. Is a sort of one of the favourite areas that of mine at the moment. That's I think about regularly is unlearning. But the problem we have is that we quite often get trapped in our own bubbles of thinking and routines and industries. And I think, like for example, you mentioned the cement company that actually brought in its customers. In other words, the supplier, the cement companies, thinks it's got the answers, but hang on, let's actually talk to some other people outside our bubble, even though they're buying cement. Because I certainly feel sometimes that I'm just trapped in my own routines and patterns that restrains me and restricts me to not have a very, I suppose, wide view of the world that allows me to think outside the box, which is an overused term, I know. And I love the 3 types of knowledge you mentioned in the book as well. Things we know, we know. Things we know, we don't know. And I think the biggie is things we don't know, we don't know. I think so. Be interested in your thoughts on why you mentioned those 3 types of knowledge.
Well, so that is how I think something like future thinking and scenarios, when you do it right, is about expanding the riverbanks, getting outside your comfort zone. It should feel a little bit uncomfortable. And if it doesn't, you're not doing it right. I like to think I help clients get to the right solutions, but sometimes, you know what, Jeff, I don't. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I was working with an airport, quite a large Canadian airport, and the CEO kind of looked at me and said, let's think about the worst case scenario for airline travel. And I said, yeah, okay, let's do that. We were in the boardroom with the management team. And he said, 9/11 airline travel dropped 5% immediately afterwards for a period of time. It was bad. I said, yeah, I remember that. That was pretty bad. And he said, so maybe the worst case scenario would be it would drop 6% in the future because of some event. And I kind of looked at him, and he's a big CEO of many different companies in his career and far smarter than me, and I'm kind of reasonably smart. And we looked at each other, we looked at the rest of the management team. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. It dropped 95%. 95%. We were so wrong. Why is that? Like, we get into this comfort zone of, feeling like, it can't be that bad. And, that's what I plan, Jeff, on spending the next few years as I advise clients in my job is, are we stretching the riverbanks? Really, are we feeling uncomfortable? It can't be ridiculous, because it's got to be possible. It's got to be plausible. It's got to be probable. But boy, we need to stretch beyond, because what did Mike Tyson say? Everybody's got a good plan until they get punched in the face.
That's right.
We've been punched in the face with this COVID thing, and none of us saw it. Well, I'm sorry. Some people saw it coming, and I can talk about that if you want. but most of us didn't see it coming, and it's really impacted us.
So let's go to that question then, well, that statement. Some people did see it coming. I'd be interested in your thoughts around why they saw it coming as opposed to the others who didn't see it coming.
Yeah, like, so I talk about this in Disaster Proof is, two organizations in particular. So one is the World Economic Forum. And shameless plug for my book here, Jeff, the chairman and founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, has endorsed my book. And so the World Economic Forum, the Johns Hopkins University, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they teamed up and they ran an event called Event 201. You can look it up online. And they said, look, there's a virus. It'll come as a potential scenario, potential future. They didn't know. It will come from bats, spread to pigs, spread to humans, and this will start in Brazil. And then it will travel, and it won't be lethal initially. And the symptoms will be light, so that it'll spread easily. Exactly what happened. It will spread through airline travel. It'll crush the private sector, on and on and on. You look at it and you go, oh my God, like they perfectly predicted what will play out. CSIS is another company, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, played out different scenarios, global pandemic, novel coronavirus. It played out. And we ignored these companies. We ignored these institutions. But what it proved to me, Jeff, when I was researching for the book, is scenarios are a very, very powerful way about thinking about the future. And we have to take these things more seriously as we go forward, because, here's two examples. And there's been organizations talking about coronavirus for 10 years, that the world is going to get hit by a major pandemic, and it happened. And we didn't take it seriously at the time. Yeah. I suppose it's always easy to think about it in hindsight, and then in the moment it's tough, right? But I think those are two great examples right there.
So how would an organization, because you can't plan for every disaster potentially, how many disaster scenarios should you plan for? That would be, it's like, and I suppose you talked about, you've got to go and do the research. You've got to see what's playing out in front of you, as in what's the trends in the industry that you're in. Energy is a great example. Well, it looks fairly clear what's going to happen with energy and oil and renewables. But then there's technology races that are happening, and I came across a new invention for hydrogen batteries over the weekend and doing some reading. And there's an Australian company that has spent 14 years of research and has just announced a product that overcomes the two major issues with hydrogen, which is, number one, you got to store it under pressure, and number two, you got to keep it really cold, if for transport or for use. And they've done that by using a hydrite, for example. So sometimes there's a hidden tech that shows up that just disrupts an industry.
So your question is?
Maybe I didn't ask one. I was just ranting and raving, really. So I suppose what would be some words of wisdom in terms of scenario planning for a business? How often should you do it? That sort of thing. So and also not to. The problem is that you can do a lot of planning, but you're not doing enough doing, because in business you're still going to make money. So there's that sort of tension between planning for the future and doing stuff now. So I'm interested in how you see that tension playing out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few questions wrapped up in what you said there. So one is, I think the right number of scenarios is 2 to 4.
Okay. Yep.
If you get more than that, you're kind of getting distracted, and you're going to churn up a lot of time. And if you get less than 2, it's not a scenario, it's a forecast.
Right.
If you've got 1, so it's 2 to 4 at the end of the day. The second part of your question is, there's a reality check in business and in government, in fact, where you cannot build shock absorbers for everything, otherwise you'd be out of business.
Yep.
So there's this kind of reality check that you got to do enough to be somewhat prepared, but not too much that it's a distraction. And that's what leadership need to do. Like, leadership need to be, they need to play a front and center role here. They need to be courageous, and they need to make the right judgment call. That's what makes great leaders, I think, at the end of the day. So they're making that judgment on, how robust do we want our balance sheet to be to kind of weather the storm in case the storm comes. And then the third part of your question, which I think is important, is it's not only about downside, Jeff, it's about upside as well.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
you need to be able to look at both. There's the risk and then there's the reward. One company that I talk about in the book is the Port of Vancouver. So Vancouver is our biggest port in Canada on the West Coast. And, they went through a future-looking process of using scenarios to say, what will the port look like at 2050, the year 2050? And one of the scenarios they played out was a much more renewable-focused future. And the use of scenarios resulted in them coming up with a partnership agreement, a joint venture in some way with BC Hydro, one of the major utilities. Quite an innovative partnership, focused on a more sustainable energy future. Very innovative. They might not have done that had they not used scenarios. So there's upside as well as the downside and mitigating the risk.
Yeah. And you end up watching some just incredible thinking, which people have done scenario planning that's positive. For example, I think it's happening around the world is that big warehouses are being built with solar panels on the roof, with batteries on the grid that actually can provide baseload energy to the grid. In other words, they can make money out of the roof. Who would have thought of that 10 years ago?
I know. And I mean, and who would have thought about some of the technologies that we're using? I think about augmented reality, virtual reality, Internet of Things, AI itself, blockchain, like all these technologies that are evolving, 10, 20 years ago, who would have thought?
Yeah. And sometimes you can't predict the future, despite all the scenario planning in the world. And sometimes you just happen to be in the right place, right time. Perfect company example is Zoom. And here we are.
No, luck. Yeah, I mean, Zoom has done incredibly well. Amazon's done incredibly well. Like, who would have thought? Skip the dishes. Another one, like, I used that at the weekend. It was perfect because all the restaurants are shut.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so for me, I like to try and look at the future and see how it's going to plan out, where things are going, because I just find that fascinating. I tend to be more future looking than looking in the rear vision mirror. But sure, we need to look in the rear vision mirror and look at history and work out what the patterns are, so that we can learn from history. And I think that's the challenge for all of us, isn't it? To learn from history without spending too much time worrying about what possibly could happen in the future. So it's this. And this is where I think as humans it gets really fascinating to watch different people's responses to, we've seen a lot of people that you didn't know are what we call germaphobes. So they've gone hidden for a while in their homes and will maybe never come out. It's fascinating just to watch different reactions by companies to disasters as well, both positive and negative. So maybe to wrap things up, what would be some, I suppose, tips you would make to companies and entrepreneurs in terms of, how to make their company disaster-proof through scenario planning? What would be 2 or 3, or just a tip that you would like to leave with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, buy my book to start with. How could I not, pass up the opportunity to say that, Jeff? But on a serious note, I think um, don't be overwhelmed by this concept of future thinking and scenarios, because it can be scaled. Like, I've worked for a non-for-profit where we're using the concepts or aspects of the concepts I've worked with global global corporations like Shell and others, and everything in between. So you can scale these concepts to your small and medium-sized enterprise with ease. Don't be intimidated or overwhelmed, and pick the aspects that you like. We went through the 6 steps earlier, and I think you can do aspects of the 6 steps, but not all of them. And you have to figure out what fits for you. What do you have the time, the treasury, and the talent to do, and make it work in your context? And I think if you do that, you have a better chance of seeing around the corner in terms of what next, and in some way disaster proofing your organization a bit better. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Lance. I think that's some words of wisdom that should be applied by any entrepreneur that's wanting to make sure that they are ready for the future and planning for the future. And being a business leader, an entrepreneur always involves you are a creator, and that's what I think is great to hear. Is that essentially when you're sitting down and doing this, you come out with creative ideas to grow your company in the future and also protect yourself from disasters. And I continue to be amazed by humanity and people in terms of the ideas they come up with, both with the products to ride a trend and things to actually protect themselves from challenges and disasters. So thank you very much, Lance. It's been an absolute pleasure. The book is Disaster Proof, Scenario Planning for a Post-Pandemic Future. Is it out now, Lance?
It is, yeah. It's on Amazon.com, and it's available to order.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much, Lance. It's been a joy. It's been fun to chat about the world and where it's potentially going and not going.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Starting a business can be overwhelming, and a great way to make it simple is to go step by step. The Online Business Academy offers simple, easy to follow, and completely free courses to help you find a business idea, create a business plan, build a website, and more. The short videos, bonus activities, and resources give you everything you need to take your business up and running. Hosted by industry experts such as Ryan Foland, Jason Falls, and Kim Gast, these courses also come with interesting activities and exciting prizes. For more information, visit academy.get.online.